أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله وأعز المرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه الأخيار المنتجبين وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد يقول الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها Quran chapter 4 verse 58 And Allah commands you to deliver trusts to those or to whom they are due. It is narrated that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam said to Abu Dharr, Ya Aba Dharr, al-majalisu bil-amana wa ifsha'u sirri akhika khiyana. O Abu Dharr, the meetings expect trustworthiness and confidentiality. And revealing your brother's secrets is treason. So avoid that. One of the fundamental values of Islam is, or the fundamental values in Islam, is the value of trustworthiness, al-amana. And we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He describes what? The stewardship of man on earth as what? As amana. Inna aradna al-amanata ala samawati wal ard. Allah calls this as the trust. We have presented the trust to the heavens and the earth, and they could not bear it, but man was able to bear it. So this is what's called the amana or trust. Perhaps the value of trustworthiness stems in effect from the sense of responsibility that one might feel towards the other people. When someone leaves with you a trust, leaves with you some object, yes, you feel responsible towards preserving it. And of course, trustworthiness and trust does not only refer to physical objects. It is not only that I have to preserve whatever object you leave with me and I have to protect it as if it was my own. That's one explanation, one example of trustworthiness. Secrets of other people is a trust. Reputation and the image of other people is a trust. Things that other people might not want exposed, that you happen to know, that's a trust. That's a responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places upon you to preserve. Islam actually valued this value because essentially it is rooted in respecting the privacy of others. Islam prohibited us from what? From spying and snooping on others. Right? We mentioned a narration last week, if you remember, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that he said, لا تطلبوا عثرات المؤمنين. Do not go and track the slips and the flaws of the believers. And the Prophet said, whoever does that, Allah will track his flaws and his slips, and Allah will expose them one day. Islam prohibited us from spying and snooping. Islam also prohibited us from what? From gossip, from backbiting. Why? Because the reason that Islam prohibited spying and snooping is to preserve the privacy of people. And the reason Islam prohibited gossiping and backbiting is to restrict spreading all these what could be a private information. You should not spread it, you should not expose it. And that's the definition of ghiba. Ghiba or gossip or backbiting is what? It's not just to talk badly about someone behind their back. It is narrated that ghiba is what? ذِكْرُكَ أَخَاكَ بِمَا يَكْرَهُ. Is that you mention about your brother or sister something that they don't like exposed and they don't like to be said about them. It could be something that is a private information. And so respecting confidentiality in meetings is very important. It's very important. And this is what the hadith of the Prophet is talking about. This is because meetings in general and private meetings in specific is an environment where people would kind of let down or put down their guard. In a private meeting with a few other people, Salaam alaikum, you would feel more comfortable, you would feel more relaxed. You don't feel you have to calculate your words, right? Imagine that you're talking to, or you're talking in front of the camera on TV. Yes, you'd feel the pressure of having to calculate your words because you don't know who the people out there are and how they would understand you. But when you are talking to a few people in some private conversation, a private meeting, then you feel more relaxed, right? Then you might not make all these calculations. And you would hope or you would trust that the person in front of you would not one day, for example, flip and turn against you and expose what you might be exposing to him or her. Islam therefore emphasizes that in such a scenario, this is a trust. Al-majalisu bil-amana, the Prophet is educating us. He's saying, look, when you are in meetings, in private meetings, there is an expected code that whatever is discussed in this meeting is a trust. Treat it as a trust. Don't go out and expose what was discussed if the people don't give you consent about it, if it's a private kind of meeting. And therefore, Islam wants us to have a community whereby people feel relaxed talking to each other. People feel comfortable talking to each other. It wants to preserve this kind of spontaneity in conversations so that you don't have to worry so much when you want to talk to someone, when you trust that whatever was discussed is not going to be misused. Then you feel more comfortable talking to people. Then you have a community of trust, a community of comfort. In this context, let me just mention a few gaps that we might find in some communities. Some examples, just to appreciate how respecting confidentiality is very important. One example is marriage conflict. Conflict between a husband and a wife, and this happens almost in every house. So sometimes you might see one spouse from the first fight might go and expose her husband, for example, or the husband from the first argument goes and exposes his wife, right? This is a very sensitive matter here, very sensitive matter, especially if there are kids in the house and all they see is or they fall victim of their parents' mismanagement of their conflict, for example. So there needs to be an understanding that what is in the house, what happens in the house, is something that should remain in the house. The husband and the wife should respect the confidentiality of each other. Of course, unless we're talking about, the case of when someone has to go and seek professional counseling, that's an exception. But the rule is that things that even might not be exposed to close relatives, they should not be exposed outside the house. And perhaps this is why also God told us that, look, even when it reaches the stage of divorce, even when you reach the stage of divorce, there's a verse in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 237, says, وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. The verse is talking about divorce. And in the end of it, it says, وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. And do not forget the favors amongst yourselves. Surely Allah is all seeing of what you do. Sometimes someone might say, what a waste of time, what a waste of opportunity, right? No, Allah is seeing this in front of you. Allah is seeing what's happening in front of you. Allah is seeing what you're going through. So it's not in vain. إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Allah is all seeing, all knowledgeable about what is happening. So even the end of marriage through divorce, it should remind us that what? That there are still rights and responsibilities between the man and the woman towards respecting each other as Muslims, as believers. This doesn't allow you to remove the disrespect. And as it was before marriage. So before marriage, you were a believing man, a believing woman, you have respect, rights, responsibilities. That remains after divorce. That's one example. Another example is that sometimes you might be working in some place where you interact a lot with people. You talk to people. People might open up to you about maybe some private matters. Sometimes you might be in a position where you have some permissions to, let's say, look at private data, private information of some people. You're a clinician in a hospital, for example, or you're a psychiatrist, psychotherapist. Some people might open up to you about their private lives. That's a responsibility, that's a trust upon you. Some information that you know about your employees, for example, that's a trust in your hands. You're not allowed to go and expose it without their consent. Another example, and now we see this a lot actually now with the boom in technology, social media and all that. You might see someone, for example, posting something on Facebook, something about private life. Because of a mistake, because of, someone went and wrote something impulsively, and you see some people taking screenshots or, commenting or sharing or exposing. I mean, should we not exercise trustworthiness and confidentiality in this case? And think that this might have been a slip? We try to cover for the person rather than exposing her or him? So that's an example. Or you see some people sometimes, they might record you on the call, right? Someone, calling, and they open the loudspeaker so that other people are hearing. That's an example of confidentiality that you should respect and protect. Who gives you the permission to expose that call without the consent of the person talking? So these are examples that we need to be heedful of, and the Prophet ﷺ warned us against. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And Islam wanted to preserve this spontaneity in meetings and this warmth between the believers. I'll finish with this hadith, a very beautiful hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. He says, إذا تلاقيتم فتلاقوا بالتسليم والتصافح وإذا تفرقتم فتفرقوا بالاستغفار. That when you meet each other with greeting and with shaking hands. And when you separate with istighfar, with asking God to forgive you. When you meet each other, the Prophet is saying, extend the hand of positivity, love, respect. Give the other person, make them feel that they are safe in this meeting that is combining you two together now. Make them feel safe, secure. Tasafuh, wa taslim, salam, peace. And when you depart with istighfar. Ask Allah to forgive whatever might have happened of wrong. And this is actually a sign or a signal or a hint that whatever was discussed in this meeting, khalas, act as if it never happened. Don't go and expose the content of it outside. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that He may help us observe the values that Islam has educated us on. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيارتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الكبرى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. صل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله والورع عن محارمه. My dear brothers, my dear sisters, servants of God, I enjoin myself and yourselves to observe taqwa, to fear God, to be God conscious, and to stay away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. Now 3 months have passed. 3 months of the war on Palestine have passed so far. And I thought to present a quick review of what the achievements of Israel have been so far. I think it is fair to mention what these achievements are. Number one achievement of the Israeli war on Palestine is that it brought back to life the Palestinian cause. After years of almost being annihilated, forgotten forever, it brought it back to life. The second achievement of Israel in this war after 3 months is that Israel lost the bet on the desperation of the Palestinian people to have no hope, for the Palestinian people to forget about their lands, to forget about their homes. And we see the Palestinians in Gaza insisting that they will want to stay in their homes, despite the massacres, despite the atrocities. And we hear the audacity of some officials in Israel actually saying, look, you can run away, you can go to Sinai Desert. And they would talk to or address the Egyptians and say, look, Egyptians, you need to play ball here, you need to receive the Palestinians. What happened for 3 months so far has proven that there's no Palestinian that has forgotten his home in Palestine. So that's an achievement of Israel. The third achievement of Israel is the rising popularity of the resistance against the Israeli war machine in Palestine. Now we hear about polls in different places, polls in Palestine even. The popularity of the resistance has risen so high. Bring one person who says now, okay, look, the political solution brought something to the Palestinians. This is the situation that Israel has brought to the area. A rise in that popularity. People are showing support to the resistance, despite the atrocities, despite the massacres. This is an achievement of Israel. Another achievement of Israel is the downfall of the image of Israel in the world today. The downfall. A massive blow to that image, which the media in the US, in the West, and even in Arab countries, especially recently, they have paid billions of dollars to polish that image for decades and decades. In 3 months, what Israel has achieved is that they exposed themselves, is that the true mask has now fallen. So Israel now is shown in its reality to the world. Now who talks about Israel calling it the democracy in the Middle East, or the strongest economy, or the mighty army, or all these names that we used to hear in these countries? Now what do we hear about Israel? The children killing Israel. The women killing Israel. Over 22,000 innocent people killed so far. That's Israel. The genocidal Israel. That's what we hear. The cause of starvation, Israel. The outlaw, Israel. The expelling of people, Israel. The slaughter of children and women, Israel. The people of the West who have been fed for decades the Israeli narrative, the Zionist narrative, are now waking up to reality that this is not what we've been hearing about Israel for decades and decades. And actually we see even in the United States, the people of America who also have been fed all these lies for years. Now we see in polls saying that almost 50% of people are opposing Israel. When did anyone imagine that we would reach such a stage? That's the blessing of the innocent blood of people of Palestine. This is another achievement of Israel in the last 3 months. Another achievement of Israel in the last 3 months is that the efforts of the normalization of ties with Israel, especially amongst the Arab world, or amongst the Arab countries, has now collapsed, is now endangered, if not collapsed completely. Another achievement of the state of Israel in this war is that the world now understands how ineffective the international will and the international opinion is in these situations. We all have seen in the United Nations Council how almost 150 countries, respected nations, they all proposed a ceasefire, while what? The United States government, representative of Israel, and some other states, they refused that ceasefire. And we saw, all of us, I think, on TV in the Security Council, the hand of the deputy of the American delegation, raising his hand, saying what? Veto to ceasefire. If this war showed something, it showed that this war not only was supported by the United States government, but also financed. The weapons are American weapons. The rockets that are being thrown on the civilians are American. Those who propose themselves as defenders of human rights in the world, now they are exposed. This war, what it taught people is that the international community is unable to protect you unless you are powerful. Is this the lesson that we want to teach the world? This is what Israel is doing with the backing and the support of the United States of America. This is a very dangerous stage that humanity can reach, where the rule of law has no voice. That's an achievement of the Israeli war for the past 3 months. Another achievement is that Israel, which for decades has been terrorizing and deterring and frightening the nations around it and next to it. Those of you who have visited some neighboring countries, Lebanon is one. You might remember that always if you look at the sky up above Beirut or other cities in Lebanon, there's always fighting jets, Israeli fighting jets, drawing smoke lines in the skies. Now you see that the nations around Israel are not. So now you don't see these fighting jets as much. And the nations around Israel are not terrified anymore with their terrorism. Another accomplishment of the Israeli war on Palestine for the past 3 months is the collapse of the trust of people inside Israel. Their trust in the army has collapsed. That army, which for 3 months has not achieved any goal, except what? The massacres, the genocide against the civilians. That's an achievement of this war. That's an achievement of that army so far. So the people, naturally, they're not trusting that army anymore. How many hundreds of casualties have the Israelis had so far? Especially the ones that are unannounced. How many hundreds of war machines, tanks, cars, whatsoever, have been destroyed so far? How many captives, Israeli captives, did the Israeli army save from the hands of the Palestinians? How many did they kill with their own hands and their own machine? They killed their own people. Is that an achievement? That's an achievement, it seems, for Israel in the past 3 months. Another achievement is that we see reports in the newspaper Haaretz that said the events of October 7 and what resulted after estimated 300,000 additional people needing of what? Mental health support in Israel. That's an achievement of the Israeli war machine against Palestine. Another achievement, the displacement of almost 250,000 people from the north of Israel. That's not counting the people from the south. That's an achievement of the Israeli war machine. Another achievement, Israel will have spent in this war tens of billions of pounds or US dollars. That's the cost of this war. That's an achievement so far. And at last, another achievement is that this war exposed some of those governments who in the beginning of the events, they would say, we stand with Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself. And they would not count the civilian casualties of the Palestinians when they reached 10,000 people. When they reached 20,000 people, also no one spoke. Do you know when people or some governments or state spokesmen started to talk? When ships in the Red Sea started to be blocked. When the economy started to be hit. This is where, notice it, that some prime ministers or some presidents, they started saying, look, we need to pay attention to the civilian casualties in Palestine. When their wealth was endangered and threatened, that's where they remember that there are civilians being bombarded in Palestine. When the dollar value started to go up or down, or the shekel value started to go up and down, that's where they started remembering. This war of 3 months, it exposed these governments and these people in specific. And alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who exposes the tyrants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes them. Like He exposed Fir'aun when he plotted and he wanted to humiliate Musa in public, and he invited Musa in public so that he can be defeated in public. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defeated Fir'aun in public. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works. And that's a promise. That's a law. That's a law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world. We of course implore our UK officials to stand with the righteous cause in these events, to call for a quick and permanent ceasefire in Palestine, and to bring back the rights of the Palestinians. I mean, are these not basic rights that we are asking? Do the Palestinian people not have the right to return back to their homes and stop being expelled from their homes? Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask for the rights of those who have been expelled for decades to go back to their homes, to their houses, to decide for themselves what their future is to be? Self-determination. We reached a stage where we are begging for basic human values and human rights. We implore the UK officials to make it right, to take the right stance in this conflict. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to support all the oppressed against all oppressors around the world, and that He may grant patience and resilience to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Lebanon, everywhere there is oppression. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.